Okay. All right. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. I had a little technical difficulties there. You should be able to hear me now. This is Kennard Levy Brown with the Merciful Service of God, and I'm on Lamb Radio, and also you can see me on YouTube. Apologize for that. And I was talking about last week, and you couldn't hear me, about Hurricane Michael, and that I hope that those who were in that area, I hope that everything is okay. I certainly did pray for you, and I'm sure many Americans prayed for those who were in that area. And I did hear there's some damage, and unfortunately there are some deaths involved in that. And so please pray for those who were affected by that hurricane. And so we are going to continue our Bible study today on the book of Ezekiel. And hopefully we'll get into Ezekiel chapter 37. But what we're going to do, as we always do on this program, we're going to go and look at what's going on in the world right now, in particular Koenig's website. And that website address is www.watch.org. That's www.watch.org. And you can go there if you have access to the internet. And the top news today involves a country in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. U.S. says Pompeo, Saudi Crown Prince backed journalist Khashoggi probe. And so something's going on with probing a certain individual. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has held talks in Saudi Arabia with King Salman over the disappearance and alleged killing of Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi. President Donald Trump dispatched Pompeo to writing after he spoke with the Saudi king about the disappearance of Khashoggi, who wrote critically of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Khashoggi disappeared while visiting the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 2 weeks ago. All right, and also there's some news about Trump's envoy. He reveals a plan to unite Gaza and the West Bank. So here we go again with recognizing or having something to do with the so-called peace plan. Jason Greenblatt stresses U.S. is involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to help all Palestinians in both the West Bank and Gaza, and slams disinformation being spread by some parties who have not even seen the plan yet wish to be spoilers. The White House's peace plan entails intentions to unify the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now, the West Bank, of course, includes the area of Judea. And Jason Greenblatt, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, told Ynet on Tuesday. Palestinian media outlets claim that a key element of the yet unreleased U.S. peace plan, so it's yet unreleased, and I'm sure that you and myself and a lot of other people are looking forward to seeing exactly what this plan is all about. This is, of course, by Donald Trump and his administration. The U.S. peace plan is separating the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip from the Fatah-ruled Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And so anyway, let me repeat that and underscore this. It says a key element of the yet unreleased U.S. peace plan is separating the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip from the Fatah-ruled Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So that's interesting that that is coming to play here. And so we need to take a look at that and watch as the Master commands us to do. And I know people are perhaps a little saddened that Nikki, the U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley, resigned, and we'll see how that plays into biblical prophecy in the future. There's another headline that says, opening Knesset, Netanyahu rips opposition for ignoring fantastic progress. So here we go again with politics. The first day of Knesset overshadowed by talk of election. So they're trying to get President or Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu involved in another election. Another headline here, Trump immediately sending Pompeo to meet with Saudi king over missing activists. President Trump said Monday he is immediately sending Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I already talked about something earlier. This is the story that led to this. to Saudi Arabia to meet with King Salman to discuss the disappearance of Saudi activist Jamal Khashoggi. I quote, just spoke to the king of Saudi Arabia, who denies any knowledge of whatever may have happened to our Saudi Arabian citizen, end of quote. He said that they were working closely with Turkey to find an answer. And I am immediately sending our Secretary of State to meet with the king. Trump tweeted Monday morning, and I tell you, we have a tweeting loving president. That's for sure. Putin Rouhani deal will ensure Iran avoids U.S. oil sanctions, Iran said to warn. And so Russia and Iran has agreed on a mechanism to spare Iran the impact of what was intended by the U.S. to be crippling sanctions on its oil industry from next month. An Israeli Foreign Ministry document reportedly warns. The mechanism provides for Iran to export crude oil to Russia across the Caspian Sea. The oil will then be refined at Russian refineries, and from there it will be exported worldwide. The secret Israeli document states, according to a report on Hadashah TV News on Sunday, in return, Moscow will provide Iran with unspecified trade and service benefits. And so here's another headline. It's October 14th. It says, Lieberman, Israel still active in Syria after downing of Russian plane. And so again, folks, let's take a look at this prophecy. It's a very interesting prophecy in Isaiah chapter 17. Now, we certainly have to be familiar with what's going on in the Middle East, ladies and gentlemen. It's very important. And Isaiah chapter 17, again, what does it state? And I'm hearing in the headlines, Syria often. And it says in Isaiah 17, verse 1, the burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, despite what so-called scholars have stated, some anyway. This has never happened in the history of the world where Damascus was no longer a city. So we know this has to happen. And it shall be a ruinous heap. That's never happened. Verse 2, the cities of Aurora are forsaken. They shall be for flocks, which shall lie down and none shall make them afraid. Verse 3, the fortress, a protection, military armament or protections, also shall cease from Ephraim, and Ephraim could mean those 10 lost tribes and also can mean the geographical area. I believe this scripture is indicating that it means both. And the kingdom from Damascus and the remnant of Syria. The reason why is because you have the United States, NATO, and other Western nations involved with this situation in the Middle East. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, says the Master of Hosts. Verse 4, in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Yaakov or Jacob shall be made thin. So this is indicating some economic problems that we're going to talk about in the economic collapse website that we're going to go to. This is what this Middle Eastern war certainly will aggravate the economic problems that is talked about by Michael Schneider on his economic collapse blog. And so in verse 4 of Isaiah 17, in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Yaakov shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. In verse 5. So this is, again, I talked about this last week, and you may want to view the video from last week. I talk about how Yodevahi punishes us, and he does it by, of course, one of the ways that he does it is taking or making things more difficult than they should be economically, socioeconomically. And it shall be when the harvestman gathereth the corn and reapeth the ears with the arm, and shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. Verse 6, yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uttermost bough, 4 or 5 in the uttermost fruitful branches. Therefore, says the Master of Israel. And this is interesting. This leads all the way to the return of Messiah. Verse 7, at that day shall a man look to his maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. All right, so this certainly will be one of the catalysts toward the Great Tribulation. It'll happen before the Great Tribulation. We'll have a Middle Eastern war. This is talked about here in Isaiah chapter 17, Jeremiah 49, also Psalm 83, Ezekiel 36, the first part of it. So this is something that we need to take a look at, ladies and gentlemen. This great world trouble is going to begin at Jerusalem and end at Jerusalem with the second coming of Messiah. And so we need to pay attention to what's going on. All right, let's go to the Economic Collapse blog. And that's the economiccollapseblog.com for those who have internet access. And you can go there with me. So Michael Snyder does an excellent job. He recently ran for Congress, and he states here, when the bubble bursts, the bubble is simply we're spending more money than we have, and it's just the bubble is just blowing, 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 blowing up. And then, of course, when you put a nail in that bubble, what happens, right? It bursts, right? So America will experience an economic crisis much greater than the 2008 meltdown or the Great Depression. And so this should not shock anybody what's going on. One of the seals in the book of Revelation, let's go there. Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6. You know, God has put this all in here so that we can understand and won't be shocked by what's going on here. All right, so Revelation chapter 6, verse 5, it says, and when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast come and say, come and see. And I beheld, and a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. So you have the pair of, I'm sure you've seen an illustration of someone with balances. It's talking about economics, certainly talking about socioeconomics as well. Socioeconomics is the economics of people being able to have enough resources to support themselves. All right, so in verse 6, and I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So obviously this certainly has a lot to do with socioeconomics, ladies and gentlemen. And we've been, even in the 20th century, we've had socioeconomic issues, and certainly in the 21st century, it's going to get far worse than it was in the 20th century, ladies and gentlemen. And so we have to understand that. Now, what I like about this commentary from David Stearns, he does have some good insight. He's a Messianic Jew, and I only read commentaries when they're backed up by scripture. So right here in Revelation 6, verse 6, it says, the rich are cushioned by their wealth from the effects of economic inequality and scarcity. I've talked about this on this program, that we are certainly in that time that is talked about. Hold your place here in Revelation chapter 6, and let's go to Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 14. This is a prophecy. There is prophecy in the book of Proverbs. In Proverbs 30, verse 14, there is a generation, and I'm going to say that this generation certainly has overflowed into the 21st century, whose teeth are as swords, and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. And I have all kinds of stats and proof on my website that this is true. If you go to my website, mercifulservantsofgod.com, and click on the tabs about poverty, you'll come to a website that reveals that 80% of people in the world live on less than $10 a day. And there's other socioeconomic statistics that will reveal the true nature of the economic inequality that is prophesied to occur, and that is occurring based on the book of Revelation and what it says in the seal. So let's go back to Revelation chapter 6, verse 6, and continue on with David Stern, who is a Messianic Jew who lives in Jerusalem. I think he still lives. He's in his 70s or 80s. The rich are cushioned by their wealth from the effects of economic inequality and scarcity, but the poor, who must pay a day's wages, literally a denarius. So a denarius is a day's wages for starvation rations, are brusquely ordered not to meddle with or damage the olive oil or the wine, now luxuries far beyond their means. Now, this is another quote from another Jew. He states the following. Liechtenstein, he says, Yachel, I think, Liechtenstein. He states, weighing the bread is a sign of a curse, according to Leviticus 26, verse 26. And this is what Leviticus 26, verse 6 says. It says, they shall dole out your bread by weight. You will eat, but you will not be satisfied. So the Bible, and this has been going on, you've had famine all throughout the ages, ever since Messiah prophesied that this would occur in Matthew 24. However, it is getting worse and worse and worse. In particular, at the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, with the invention of the steamboat and Britain starting to create innovations that caused the separation, the great separation of the rich and the poor. How did this happen? So prior to the 1800s, civilization was agrarian, meaning that most people understood how to farm. And so when innovations occurred where production increased, well, that spawned the birth, or started the birth of factories. And of course, when you have factories, you need more human resource or employees to make sure that the factories are working at full capacity. And so what happened is that that caused people who had land, had property, had farms to change their profession, or if they did have a profession near their home where they were still farming and growing crops and slaughtering their own meats and raising cattle. But they stopped all that and they went into the cities, the new cities that were being built because of all this innovation. And the innovation, it certainly caused a need for more workers to continue to have this innovation occur. Then you can imagine when you had people leaving their land, their farms, and going over and working in these manufacturing plants. And of course, when you had manufacturing plants, eventually you had uh, offices created too, linked with the manufacturing plants. So that caused people to be in those offices instead of being at home, near their home, and farming. And so that began in the 1800s, and that certainly contributed to the inequality that we have today. Um, and so that I may even do an entire program on that in the future. Um, what happened? Uh, how did the Industrial Revolution cause this great inequality that we have worldwide, in particular in the Western nations? So that's something that I'll talk about in the future. But anyway, let's get to this headline here about the great bubble bursting. He says, Michael Snyder here says, the bigger they come, the harder they fall. Currently, we are in the terminal phase of an everything bubble, which has had 10 years to grow. It is the biggest, and he's talking about since 2008. It is the biggest financial bubble that our country has ever seen, and experts are warning that when it finally bursts, we will experience an economic downturn that is even worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. Let me underscore that. He's thinking, or he's predicting, or estimating, or guesstimating that we will experience an economic downturn that is even worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. Of course, many of us in the alternative media have been warning about what is coming for quite some time. But now, even many in the mainstream media have jumped on the bandwagon. The Economist is one. I love The Economist. I share a lot of articles from it. It's a non-biased magazine. The Economist is one of the most prominent global mouthpieces in the entire world. And so I was stunned when I came across one of their articles early today that was titled, Another Economic Downturn is Just a Matter of Time. When the alternative media and the globalist media outlets are both preaching economic doom, that is a very clear sign that big trouble is imminent. And I agree with him totally. You can read the rest of that at your leisure by clicking the read more hyperlink. Another article, he says global markets continue to fall as Bloomberg, which is a top financial news source, warns the next financial crisis is staring us in the face. So these are all reputable sources, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to pay attention to this. It looks like it could be another tough week for global financial markets. As the week began, markets were down all over the world, and relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia, I just talked about that, have taken a sudden turn for the worse. That could potentially mean much, much higher oil prices. And needless to say, that would be a very bad thing for the US economy. It has really surprised many of us how dramatically events have begun to accelerate here in the month of October, and the mood on Wall Street has taken a decidedly negative turn. Yes, US stocks did bounce back a bit on Friday. but it was much less of a bounce than many investors were hoping for. And this week got off to a rough start with all the major markets in Asia down significantly. And so you can click the hyperlink on there if you want to read the rest of that. Now, here's another headline here. You can kick the can down the road, but reality will catch up with you eventually. And so nobody can defy the laws of economics forever. Whether it is an individual, a company, or the nation as a whole, reality always catches up with everyone eventually. For years, I've been warning that Sears, now Sears, I used to love going to Sears when I was in Chicago with my mom, and I used to always ask my mom, can you get me some popcorn at Sears? I used to always love going there. Now Sears, of all companies, are having economic problems. That should tell you that something really is horrifyingly wrong with our economy in this country. For years, I have been warning that Sears was eventually going to zero, but of course it didn't happen immediately. Sears CEO Eddie Lampert kept convincing investors to pour more money into the beleaguered money pit. And so the can kept getting kicked down the road. He's talking about the Sears can. It takes a great con man to be able to pull off what Eddie Lampert was able to pull off. Well, that's his opinion there. That's what Mike Snyder's saying. And we should all be in awe at the level of skill that he has displayed. But all good cons eventually come to an end. And now the retailer that was once the largest in world history. And so Sears was the largest. So Walmart overtook them. And Sears, prior to Walmart, was the largest retailer in world history. And he states that it's coming to an end. According to multiple media reports, a Sears bankruptcy filing, that would be bankruptcy number 11. For a while there, it looked like it would be a Chapter 7 filing, which would mean immediate liquidation for Sears. I'm familiar with business, and most businesses file Chapter 11, but this is interesting that they were trying to file Chapter 7 here. But anyway, liquidation means all their assets and everything are totally absorbed. For it appears that Lampert will be able to secure enough funding to give Sears a little bit of breathing space. All right, so a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing will allow most of the stores to stay open through the holidays and will give Sears more time to sell off his assets. That's a shame. I mean, I really feel bad about that because I used to love going to Sears, and it just shows you, ladies and gentlemen, the seriousness of what's going on. It's not the end of the world, folks, but certainly these things will lead to what I believe is good news, the end of this world, the end of the way we are living, and then the Messiah will come back and show us all how to do things correctly. And so another headline here, October horror on Wall Street. Investors nervously watch to see if the S&P 500 will bounce back above its 200-day moving average. So that means the Standard & Poor's, another index that's involved with the stock market. Is this going to be another October to remember for Wall Street? As I have explained previously, the month of October has historically been the worst month by far for the U.S. stock market, and it has also been the month when our most famous stock market crashes have taken place. The stock market crash that started the Great Depression in 1929 happened in October. The largest single-day percentage decline in stock market history happened in October 1987. And most of us still remember what happened in October 2008. At least I hope you do. Excuse me. So we will be adding to, in other words, he asked, so will we be adding October 2018 to that list? Well, so far things are certainly moving in that direction. Between Wednesday and Thursday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged a total of 1,378 points. So this is between Wednesday and Thursday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged a total of 1,378 points. And the Standard & Poor's S&P 500 is now broken below the all-important 200-day moving average. If the S&P 500 bounces back above the 200-day moving average on Friday, that will be a sign that things have stabilized, at least for the moment. If that doesn't happen, all hell, and he's saying all hell, and remember that word's in the Bible, all hell might break loose next week. All right, so we'll see. We witnessed the third largest point crash in stock market history on the same day that the third most powerful hurricane to ever hit the U.S. made landfall. I'm going to underscore that again and repeat that. We witnessed the third largest point crash in stock market history on the same day that the third most powerful hurricane. And so Hurricane Michael was the third most powerful hurricane to ever hit the U.S. made landfall. If you don't believe in coincidences, which is accidental occurrences, what are we supposed to make of this? On Wednesday, the third most powerful hurricane to ever hit the United States made landfall in the Florida Panhandle. Entire communities were absolutely shredded as Hurricane Michael came ashore with sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. You can find the entire article that I just posted. This is what Michael Snyder did about this massive storm. And he says right here, you can click on their hyperlink if you want. In this article, I'm going to focus on what just happened on Wall Street at the exact same time that Hurricane Michael was causing chaos in the Southeast. An October stock market crash was causing havoc in the Northeast. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was 831 points, which was the third largest single-day point crash in stock market history. Of course, it isn't as if we hadn't been repeatedly warned that this was coming. This was coming. And the truth is that it looks like this is only the start of the financial shaking. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we have to pay attention to things like this, and we're going to have to pay attention to what God is obviously showing us, that the handwriting is on the wall, and that we have to take these things serious here. And we have to stop thinking that God is pleased with our behavior here in the United States. He's not. He's not pleased with our behavior. I'm talking about collectively. There's always the few. There's always the few that are going to do right, but there's not enough of those people. And God is telling us, and he's through hurricanes, and I talked about this last week. He punishes us based on our social behavior. This is proved by reading Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26 and other places in the Bible. And he wants to be obeyed, folks, just like when you go to your places of employment. You have a boss there, right? And that boss expects to be obeyed. Well, Yod-Heh-Vah, the creator of the universe, is no different. And for some reason, well, I do know the reason why, traditional Christianity as a whole think that he's different, and he's not. There's no license to sin, ladies and gentlemen. Romans chapter 6, verse 1 and 2 says grace does not give you that. Grace empowers you to obey him, okay? According to Titus 2. Well, let's go there. Let's understand what the simple definition of grace is. Grace does not give you a license to sin. Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2. It says, and starting in verse 1, this is a simple definition of grace. For the grace of Yod-Heh-Vah that bringeth salvation has appeared to all men. Verse 12, teaching us that denying ungodliness, so grace has something to do with denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously. What is righteousness? I'm going to go to that in a minute. And godly in this present world. And so what is the definition of righteousness? Well, let's turn to Deuteronomy 6, verse 25. And let God define what righteousness is for us. And Deuteronomy 6, verse 25, and it shall be our righteousness. Oh, our righteousness. If we observe to do, does it say some of these commandments? No, all these commandments before the master, as he has commanded us. And so he's talking about all his commandments, not some of them, as traditional Christianity teaches. And so, and here's another definition of righteousness in Psalm 119, Psalm 119, Psalm 119, 172. 172, it states, my tongue shall speak of thy word. My tongue shall speak of thy word. For all thy commandments, or mitzvot in Hebrew, that's what it means in plural, are righteousness. And so righteousness has something to do with keeping all his instructions and all his mitzvot, or commandments, all of his instructions. That's what righteousness is. And so Michael Snyder says here's the middle class erosion. There's 33 million Americans that will not travel during the holidays because they can't afford to do so now. I think you guys understand my position about Christmas and Easter and all these fraudulent days that the devil has conjured up. But the the point that he's making in the article is that people can't, usually people use these days to go visit their family that's out of town, and they can't do it because they don't have the money. And it costs money to travel, as many of you know. We have repeatedly been told that the U.S. economy is booming, but meanwhile, the middle class in the United States continues to be hollowed out. The financial bubbles that the Federal Reserve has created has been a great blessing for those at the very top of the economic pyramid, as the Bible prophecies reveal. But most of the country is still deeply struggling. And see, this is news that people, you don't hear this on CNN, the major media outlets. They don't want you to know about these things. And so I just hope that you pay attention to what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you, you can verify all these things to be true. The financial bubbles that the Federal Reserve has created has been a great blessing for those at the very top of the economic pyramid, but most of the country is still deeply struggling. According to one survey, 78% of all full-time workers in the U.S. live paycheck to paycheck. Sure, just like I talked about blacks in the latest program I did with James and Gail O'Hare and Gabrielle. Sure, blacks, 78 or 79% of them are not in poverty, but they, like many other Americans, have to live paycheck to paycheck. And that doesn't even include part-time workers or those that are unemployed. We have also been told that unemployment is low, but the real numbers tell us that there are more working age Americans without a job in 2018 than there was at any point during the last recession. Most of the people that my wife and I know are struggling, and I continue to get emails from readers all over the country that are struggling. The sad truth is that the middle class is slowly but surely dying, and more people are falling into poverty with each passing day. So you look at all these statistics and so forth, and they're not really telling you the true story of what's going on. And I think I may devote a program in the future to maybe I'll entitle it "The Real Economy" to help you really understand what's really going on. I'm not saying that you can't make it in this country, but it's much more difficult for everyone. It doesn't make a difference what color you are to make it in this country. And what I mean by make it, I'm talking about socioeconomically, where you have enough to be able to take care of yourself and then take care of your kids and then their kids' kids, you know, as the Bible talks about that we should be able to do. And so just be praying for this nation. Pray that we repent collectively. Again, I preached this message before, and I will preach it again as long as I'm still alive. In Jeremiah chapter 18, it states here in verse 7, "At what instant I shall speak concerning a Goyer nation, and concerning a kingdom to pluck up and to pull down to destroy it, if that nation against whom I have pronounced turn from their evil, I will repent of the evil that I thought to do unto them." All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we have to continue to pray that God would have mercy on his nation, but more importantly, pray that we collectively as a nation repent and start to obey the principles of the Bible, including keeping the Sabbath and the holy days, just like Yeshua did. All right, so let's pick up on our interesting study on the book of Ezekiel. We left off in Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 28. And so we're going to start in Ezekiel 36, verse 29 now. "I will also save you," and this is in the context of the Aharit Hayamim, the last days, when Yehuda and Ephraim will be one nation. And that's talked about in Ezekiel 37. Hopefully we'll get there today. All right, so Ezekiel 36, verse 29, "I will also save you from all your uncleanness, and I will call for the corn and will increase it and will lay no famine." We just got you talking about famine, right? Well, he's not going to lay any more famine upon all the tribes of Israel at this point. In verse 30, "And I will multiply the fruit of the tree and the increase of the field, that you shall receive no more reproach of famine among the heathen." And verse 31, "Then shall you remember your own evil ways and your doings that were not good, and shall loft yourselves in your own sight for your iniquities and for your abomination." And so, shall loft yourselves in your own sight for your iniquities. We will all be ashamed of ourselves for the evil we have done and the good deeds we could have done and decided not to do. We all need the help of Yodevahi to do what we should. I totally agree with you on that end. In verse 32 of Ezekiel 36, not for your own sakes do I this, says the master, but be it known unto you, be ashamed and confounded for your own ways, O house of Israel. And verse 33, thus says the master Yodevahi, in the day that I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities. That's what the blood of Messiah does. I will also cause you to dwell in the cities, and the way shall be builded. And see, at this time, of course, when he returns, the whole world basically is going to be a wasteland. I covered that last week. Isaiah 24, verse 6 tells you that. And in verse 34 of Ezekiel 36, and a desolate land shall be tilled, whereas it lay desolate in the sight of all that passeth by. In verse 35, and they shall say, this land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden. And so, again, the whole entire goal of God's plan is to get us back to the Garden of Eden state. And certainly this verse proves that. Ezekiel 36, verse 35, and they shall say, this land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and are inhabited. Verse 36. Then the heathen that are left round about you shall know that I am the master, build the ruined places and plant that was desolate. I, the master, have spoken it, and I will do it. So the rebuilding of the land of Israel is a sign of Yodevahi being involved in the world and watching over mankind. It is a demonstration of divine providence. So true. And so Ezekiel chapter, got two more verses. Ezekiel 36, verse 37. Thus says the master Yodevahi, I will yet for this be inquired of by the house of Israel, to do it for them. I will increase them with men like a flock. In verse 38, as the holy flock, as the flock of Jerusalem, in her solemn feast, so shall the waste cities be filled with flocks of men, and they shall know that I am the master. I am the master. This is interesting. All right, so Ezekiel chapter 37. Now it starts out with dead bodies being resurrected. And then he goes on to say that Yodevahi told him to take the stick of Hebrew etz, which may also mean wood or tree, and to write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel who are joined to him. For the Jews, he was told to take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, for all the house of Israel who are joined unto him. He was then told to join them together, and they were to be achad, or one. Bystanders saw Ezekiel fulfill these symbolic actions and asked him what their meaning was. The reply was that Judah and Israel are destined to be gathered together into the land of Israel, and they are reunited. They are to become one kingdom, and one king shall rule over them. This king is referred to as David. He will either be a descendant of David or King David resurrected. He will be King David resurrected. The united Israelites shall keep the Torah. God will dwell among them, and the tabernacle temple will be rebuilt. And we learned this from two entities, Yehuda and Joseph. Joseph will remain separate from each other until the end of days. The end of days, or the Harit Hayamim, that's where we're at right now. Commentators saw this in the Hebrew original in the above passage, indicating that the reunification must take place initially through our own initiative. Ezekiel is told to take the sticks and write upon them and join them together in his own hands. Now, me add our own initiative inspired by Yodevahi himself. So Ezekiel is told to take the sticks and write upon them and join them together in his own hands. But when Yodevahi makes them one, or hot in his hand, in the last days, most of the nations of the world represented by Gog and Magog will wage war in the United Kingdom of Israel and be defeated. And so we're going to get into Ezekiel 38 and 39, and so that we could understand these prophecies. All right, so Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 1. And so the hand of the master was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the master and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones. And verse 2, and caused me to pass by them round about, and behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. And in verse 3, and he said unto me, a son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O master, only you know. God can do anything. At the end of time, there will be a resurrection of the dead. Nevertheless, the main point of our chapter on one level is not to teach about resurrection, about rather about the possibility of reviving both Yehuda and Joseph and their companions from the other tribes, so they will reunite. On another level, the chapter can even be seen as talking about two separate events, not necessarily connected in time and place. On one hand, we have the principle that in the end of days, at some point, there will be a resurrection of the dead. In addition, we have another, not necessarily connected, principle that Yehuda and Joseph will reunite. Scripture is deliberately built in such a way as to be pertinent at several levels at one and the same time. I totally agree with Yar Davidi, who is a Jew that lives in the old city of Jerusalem, that this prophecy certainly is talking about the reunification or the the revivement of Israel as a whole, but it's also alluding to the second resurrection that is talked about in the book of Revelation. Let's turn there. Well, first, let me turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And there's a statement made by Paul that helps us understand what the resurrection is all about. And so 1 Corinthians 15 verse 21 states, "For since by man came death, by man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive." So let's understand something. Everybody will at least be resurrected again. This is what this is referring to, ladies and gentlemen. But every man in his own order, not everyone at the same time. Christ, the first fruits, afterward. Now, I'm not preaching universal salvation. What I'm saying is that everyone will be resurrected again. All right. That's what this is saying here. All right. Afterward, they that are the Messiah that is coming. And then comes the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom of God, even the Father, when he shall have put all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. In verse 27, for he has put all things under his feet, but when he said all things are put under him, it is manifest that he is accepted, which did put all things under him. In other words, the Father's not going to be beneath the Son. That's that's not going to happen. So 1 Corinthians 15 verse 28, it says, "And when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also himself be subject unto him that put all things under him, that God may be all in all," or everyone will be one or hot with Yodevahe. This is what Yeshua, that was his desire in John chapter 17, if you read that whole chapter. So let's get back to Ezekiel chapter 37. And so this chapter certainly is talking about the totality of Israel being revived, but is also talking about the resurrection, the first and second resurrection. I would say actually he's talking more about the second resurrection, because the first resurrection, if you read 1 Corinthians chapter 15, some people will still be alive and they're going to be changed instantly. And then some people who, of course, the dead's going to be risen first, and of course they'll be full of bones and so forth, as described here. But in Revelation chapter 20, it talks about in verse 4, "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Messiah and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither have received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years." So those who are the Bikurim, the first fruits, and that those are people who have the spirit of truth dwelling in them now. But the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that has part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. In other words, the second death has no life. There's no power, no life, because when you have life, it shows that the power of God is causing you to live. "But they shall be priests of Yodevahe and of Messiah, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." And so this is interesting, because the rest of this is going to help us understand Ezekiel 38 and 39. And then in verse 11 of Revelation 20, "And I saw a great white throne, and he that sat on it, whose face in the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them." In verse 12, "And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God." And so, and the books were open, and another book was open, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. All right. And so that's what Ezekiel, this chapter, and we're not going to have time to go into all of it today, but we're going to pick up next week on it. And it's going to show you exactly how he's going to resurrect the majority of mankind. And I'm going to go into next week the reason why he's doing that. And I'm going to go over that scripturally. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, we're going to end the teaching for today. And I look forward to teaching you next week. And so may Yah bless and keep you, and Yah willing, I'll be available to you next week. Shalom. Peace.